build better software apps with a functional specification. Whenever we build an app, we're gonna need to specify some things about it. And to do that, there's a few critical docs we wanna try to go ahead and create. Those docs include a prerequisite to the functional spec, which is gonna be the business requirements doc, or the BRD. That's gonna explain why we're building this. After we have a BRD, we can move into creating a functional spec, which is gonna describe what this app does. It may include flowcharts that take us through the processes expected to be in the app, and also the user experience to show us what the user will be seeing when they use the app. After that, there's also the non-functional spec, or SRS. That is a big difference between the functional spec. So don't get confused between a non-functional doc and a functional doc. The functional doc is what it's doing. The non-functional doc is how it does it. So that may include sequence diagrams in a UML format, or ERDs, the database structure, entity relationships. It may contain constraints, particular security requirements, a whole bunch of things. We'll talk about that in a moment. But back to the prerequisite doc, the BRD. This is really important. So there's some key questions that I usually ask when I'm generating a BRD. Those questions are things like, what are we trying to achieve? So at a high level, what are we doing here? And then, is there anything that's currently doing this today? So have we done our research? Do we have comparisons to that, to the things that are out there already? Now, why do we need to do this? So if there's other things doing it or whatever, what is unique? What is our unique value proposition here? And then what are the issues that we're gonna face with building this thing out? And what is the pain that this solution is gonna solve? If we can define these things and explain that in detail, we'll have a pretty good document to start with. Now, when we take that and we get into building the functional spec, we'll be way ahead and be able to generate a functional spec. But first, let's talk a little bit about the SRS, or the system requirements specification, which is gonna be the non-functional aspects of this as well. So just so that we can kind of separate what we're putting in a functional spec versus a non-functional spec, in the SRS, we're gonna have things like the technical requirements, what programming language we're using, the frameworks for that, the target platforms. Is this gonna be an app that runs on Apple and Microsoft, or what? Is it a web application? The data that's involved, how we're going to go about collecting that data from the user, what we need the user to give us, and what we're gonna give to the user, and is there any prerequisite data involved in between that? And then functional requirements such as the performance criteria for the app, security requirements, things like how we're going to maintain it, what kind of reliability that we're going to expect out of it, and then any compliance and regulatory requirements. So we can add some engineering docs like the UML, which may include sequence diagrams, and then an ERD perhaps, which could include the entity relationship or the database engineering of what we're going to be implementing. So if we build all of that, then we have a pretty detailed spec, but in many cases, all that stuff can kind of get decided later. And the very first thing that we really need is a functional requirements document, or FRD. So to get the FRD, all we need is to describe in detail the features that are required to solve the problem. We defined the problem back in the BRD, in the business requirements. Now we're getting into the functional requirements, and we're going to talk about what are the features that are going to be there. And then we need to build a flow chart and map out how this app is going to flow. Then from that, we can generate or create a user experience, or Figma, a Sketch, Adobe XD. There's a number of different solutions for that. So when we do those things, when we create the when we define the features, when we put a flowchart in, when we take the Figma, and then strap the BRD document to that, we have a really good doc for handing over to a dev team and saying, hey, this is something we want to implement. If we have added the SRS on top of that, then we're even further ahead and we have a lot more defined.